A direct military conflict between China and the United States over Taiwan would dramatically shift the global strategic landscape. While East Asia would be the focal point, the consequences would ripple far beyond. Four nations with contentious relationships with Washington, particularly Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Such a scenario could offer not only relief from American pressure, but also rare openings to push their regional agendas further. First, consider Russia. A prolonged war in Ukraine has depleted its resources, exposed vulnerabilities in its military-industrial base, and led to mounting international sanctions. Despite these setbacks, Moscow continues to pursue its objectives in Eastern Europe. Should the United States divert significant military assets to the Western Pacific, the security umbrella over Europe could temporarily weaken. This shift would be welcomed in the Kremlin. Over the past few years, China and Russia have moved toward greater strategic coordination. Joint military exercises, economic cooperation, and diplomatic alignment have signaled a convergence of interests, especially when it comes to challenging U.S. influence. In a scenario where China becomes militarily engaged with the United States, it is plausible that Moscow would seek to capitalize on Washington's divided attention. Western defense officials have publicly expressed concern about this possibility. Both NATO and U.S. strategic planning documents acknowledge that a simultaneous military challenge from China and Russia would severely test American force projection capabilities. A two-front contingency, fighting in both Europe and Asia, could strain even the most well-resourced military. Yet Russia's capacity to launch a new offensive while managing its ongoing campaign in Ukraine is constrained. The Russian armed forces have suffered heavy attrition. Equipment losses and manpower shortages remain unresolved, and attempts to replenish arsenals have faced supply chain disruptions and international embargoes. Nevertheless, a conflict in East Asia could allow Russia to attempt a recalibration, shifting from defense to limited offense. Rather than launching a full-scale push westward, Russia might concentrate on expanding its control in southern and eastern Ukraine, aiming to strengthen its negotiating position or force a Ukrainian concession. However, capturing the entire country remains out of reach. Any significant reduction in U.S. military assistance would likely be met by increased European support. For many European states, the threat from Russia far outweighs any potential challenges posed by China. European governments would be motivated to act decisively to prevent Ukraine from collapsing. A Russian advance beyond Ukraine's western borders is considered a red line. The historical memory of European wars, coupled with NATO's collective defense commitments, ensures that any attempt by Moscow to exploit U.S. distraction would face substantial resistance. Russia might also use more indirect means to exert pressure. These could include economic levers such as manipulating energy exports, targeting critical food supply chains, or facilitating refugee movements, all tactics designed to test the resilience of European unity. But even with these maneuvers, a decisive breakthrough would remain elusive without major military escalation, which Moscow may not be positioned to undertake. Shifting to the Middle East, Iran represents another actor likely to view U.S.-China conflict as an opportunity. While Iran lacks the conventional military power to directly confront the United States, it has cultivated a network of proxy forces capable of asymmetric warfare. Tehran's strategic calculus has long revolved around exploiting gaps in U.S. attention to expand regional influence. A reduced American naval presence in the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters would create room for Iranian-aligned groups to intensify activities. Groups such as the Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, and Hezbollah in Lebanon could be activated to challenge U.S. interests and allies. Attacks on commercial shipping lanes, drone harassment of U.S. vessels, and cyber intrusions would all be within Iran's playbook. Iranian officials have made no secret of their interest in eroding U.S. dominance in the region. A shift in Washington's focus could accelerate their ambitions. Whether through overt actions or deniable operations, Tehran would like. However, any large-scale escalation would still be weighed against the risk of triggering a broader regional war. Iran's leadership has shown a preference for strategic patience, pursuing incremental gains rather than immediate confrontation. If the regional security vacuum becomes more pronounced, Iran may gradually intensify its involvement while avoiding a direct clash with the United States or Israel. In the background, Iran's nuclear program would continue to advance. With international monitoring stretched thin and sanctions enforcement potentially deprioritized, Tehran could make rapid technical progress. More oil sales, more hard currency, and less scrutiny would provide the resources and space to accelerate nuclear development. For Iran, time is an asset, Each delay in confrontation brings its nuclear ambitions closer to reality. Then there is North Korea, a perennial wild card in East Asian security. The country's leadership has long pursued reunification of the Korean Peninsula, although practical limitations have made this aspiration more symbolic than operational. A U.S. conflict with China could, however, tempt Pyongyang to increase its visibility on the world stage. Rather than launching a full invasion of South Korea, a scenario well beyond its current capabilities, North Korea would more likely engage in strategic signaling. Missile launches over Japan, short-range artillery fire across the DMZ, or even a new underground nuclear test could serve multiple purposes. These would reinforce the regime's internal legitimacy, demonstrate loyalty to China and Russia, and test U.S. and South Korean reaction times. Some observers may wonder whether North Korea might attempt to capitalize more aggressively. Yet the structural weaknesses of the North Korean military remain profound. Logistics are fragile, equipment is aging, and supplies of fuel and food are limited. A sustained military campaign against the South would likely collapse within weeks, risking regime survival and triggering massive refugee flows into China. Moreover, the outbreak of hostilities on the Korean Peninsula would immediately activate the U.S. South Korea-Japan Security Alliance. Far from distracting the United States, this could allow Washington to redeploy forces closer to Taiwan under the cover of collective defense. Bases in Japan and Okinawa would become even more central to U.S. operations, potentially increasing pressure on Beijing. North Korea's miscalculation would also risk undermining China's broader objectives. A land war on the peninsula would draw international attention and risk creating instability along China's northeastern border. Refugees, humanitarian obligations, and potential military engagement would force Beijing to divert resources and focus away from the Taiwan theater. Additionally, disruptions to South Korea's industrial base would send shockwaves through global supply chains. As a leading exporter of semiconductors, electric vehicle components, and consumer electronics, South Korea's production lines are deeply intertwined with global commerce, including China's own manufacturing ecosystem. In the worst-case scenario, the reintroduction of nuclear risks on the Korean Peninsula could open the door to international intervention under the banner of non-proliferation. Major powers like India or members of the European Union could seek to mediate or even project military presence, complicating China's strategic landscape further. Given these variables, China's ideal posture toward North Korea in such a scenario would be one of restraint. Low-level provocations may serve to distract and divide U.S. attention, but uncontrolled escalation would do more harm than good to Beijing's interests. In conclusion, while AU.S.China conflict over Taiwan would represent a monumental shift in global affairs, it would not occur in a vacuum. Russia, Iran, and North Korea may each perceive an opportunity to act, but their actions would be constrained by capacity, risk tolerance, and geopolitical feedback. None would move recklessly, but none would remain passive either. Each actor would seek to exploit the moment, carefully, incrementally, and with one eye always on the international response. In the next segment, attention will turn to those countries likely to feel most endangered by such a conflict, and the measures they might take in response.